Hey Twitch, welcome to the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. Okay, 2 weeks until Election Day. Actually less than 2 weeks. A lot of states have opened up early voting. We're going to talk about the midterms, what to look for, what to expect, and what it all means. My guests today are Eugene Scott, reporter for The Fix, and Gene Park from our social media team, ready to take your questions on chat. Thanks so much, guys, for being here in the studio. We also have live team coverage today. We're joined by John Gerberg from Capitol Hill and Hannah Jewell from our upstairs studio. She's been covering the election for Snapchat here at the Washington Post. Guys, before we dive into the midterms, I want to just hit the top news headlines right now. Authorities say that a number of explosive devices, essentially homemade bombs, have been intercepted at a variety of places, including the home of former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, which of course is the former home of President Bill Clinton, also former President Barack Obama, the CNN offices in New York, Eugene. Right. Very frightening, of course. Yeah. It's being condemned by politicians on both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely. I think we have seen things get to a place in our political discourse that have been very disappointing for people on both sides of the aisle, and it's quite frightening. We know what it's like to work at a place where we've had to see increases in security and have gotten hate mail and threats following just a really tough time politically. And a lot of people are looking at the White House right now for two reasons. One, to be a unifier, which is what the president is expected to do in times like this, but also to respond to some of the things he has said, calling Democrats evil, calling journalists enemies of the press. And when that type of situation becomes the norm coming from our highest leader in the land, we don't know who did this, and we don't know if they're a Trump supporter, but we can't be surprised if some people take cues from their nation's leaders and how they respond to other people in this country.
President Trump and the First Lady both condemned what's being described as essentially terror efforts. Let's listen to President Trump just a few moments ago at the White House. He was delivering remarks about the opioid crisis, but he started his comments by addressing what's happening. Watch this.
I have just concluded a briefing with the FBI, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Secret Service. As we speak, the packages are being inspected by top explosive experts, and a major federal investigation is now underway. The full weight of our government is being deployed to conduct this investigation and bring those responsible for these despicable acts to justice. We will spare no resources or expense in this effort. And I just want to tell you that in these times, we have to unify. We have to come together and send one very clear, strong, unmistakable message that acts or threats of political violence of any kind have no place in the United States of America.
President Trump, just a short time ago, to review, the New York City Police Commissioner said that the CNN mailroom got what looks to be a live explosive device. CNN was evacuated. This all started earlier this week when George Soros was sent a threatening package to his home. Obviously someone who supported liberal causes. It sort of went from there, and people like even Maxine Waters, Debbie Wasserman Schultz have also now been sort of swept up in this target, and authorities are trying to figure out if it's all related and how it all comes together. Eugene, is it important for Republicans right now to come out and condemn this? They have been very vocal on social media. The vice president among them, saying this is absolutely not okay.
Yeah, and the GOP chairwoman has as well. They should condemn it if they truly believe it's unacceptable. But if they also believe it's unacceptable, they should condemn it when the president is praising Republican congressmen for physically assaulting journalists, which he did last week. And so when you say things like there's no place or room for violence in our current discourse, it doesn't seem like it's easy to believe when you are saying statements that contradict that just a week earlier. As you all know, I worked at CNN in New York right before I came to the Washington Post, and I spent half the morning texting former coworkers there. It's a very frightening situation. Anyone who has ever been in a situation where bombs could be exploding in a school or in a workspace or in a church, all of these are places that we have seen happen in the last 2 or 3 years, knows that these aren't just words anymore. And so I think leaders in this country could set the tone on both sides of the aisle, and journalists and activists, and how we communicate with people we disagree with, because the disagreements aren't going to stop, but we got to figure out how to respond in ways that don't lead to violence.
It's such a heated climate right now as we head into this last stretch of the midterms, and we've seen the rhetoric ramped up in ads. We've also seen it on the campaign trail. We'll talk more during the show today about just what messages are on the campaign trail, what the president's saying, what Democrats are saying in response. But I want to give an overview and take a look at just what is in play right now, what the balance of power looks like. Let's take a look at the House of Representatives. As you know, everybody's up for election this year, which means they pretty much have to start running for re-election like the day after they win, something a lot of people complain about as a flaw in the system. All 435 seats are up for election. Democrats have to gain 23 seats and keep other ones that they've got. You see 7 vacancies there, but those are leaning Democratic or Republican. So, you know, even though they're vacant, there is a prediction of which way they'll go. It seems like people are really focused on like 60 or 70 races, Eugene, to see which way this is actually going to turn. And there's been some fascinating polls and reporting over the last couple of days looking at this big edge that Democrats seemed to have and how Republicans may be catching up a little bit in terms of momentum and enthusiasm.
That's in part because the demographic groups that are most likely to support Republicans just vote at higher rates in midterm elections, and the enthusiasm doesn't always translate into you know, tweets and perhaps marches, but they show up, and they show up early. And we've got a great piece on WashingtonPost.com by Philip Bump looking at who votes early, and it is older Americans, it is more conservative Americans, it is more evangelical Americans, it is Americans more likely to be white, and they are narrowing the gap that we've seen between the right and the left in terms of zeal. But the left still seems to be a little bit more enthusiastic about voting this fall.
Let's look at the Senate. Balance of power there also in question. You can see there are 35 seats up for grabs, since senators typically run every 6 years. There are a couple of seats, of course, that are in special election mode. Democrats have to gain 2 seats. That doesn't mean win 2 seats. That means they have to lock down what they've already got, gain 2 more, and there are sort of headwinds blowing both directions. We can look more at a couple of these races in micro in a little while, and I'm interested to kind of wrap up the show by talking to you about which races you're really looking at. I have a couple that I'm looking at as well. But are you seeing any sort of winds of change in terms of how everybody's talking about the Senate right now?
Yeah, I think people seem more likely to believe that the Democrats may not actually win it. It's still very possible, but when it comes to turnout, which is what's going to get the Democrats their seats, and they're hoping maybe like Arizona and Nevada, it's really going to depend on some of those core groups, Latinos, women, millennials, actually just coming to the polls. And there's been some concern about whether or not they're as motivated, whether there are some real issues related to suppression, and just whether or not Trump's just been incredibly effective. Like, he actually, I believe, is the GOP's most effective get out the vote vessel. I mean, he has really high approval ratings with Republicans.
Now, pause right there. That is so interesting. I mean, his approval ratings have actually gone up.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of points. He's still, like, the majority of Americans still don't approve of the job he's doing, but he has improved. And I think the independent voters that the GOP needs to be victorious this fall, some of them like what they see. They see the president making some promises. They see him responding very aggressively to this caravan that has a lot of people anxious. And so
you're talking about this migrant caravan. I want to dig into that more because the president has been saying a lot of things on the campaign trail that just aren't true.
Right.
And we can dig into some of those messages, but they do seem to be having an impact. Even if they're not true, they do seem to be helping his cause.
And because they helped him in 2016. We have to remember that this is a president who launched his campaign saying that Mexican immigrants were criminals and drug dealers. And so he's taking a similar approach in response to these people coming from Central America, seeking asylum, fleeing very violent and economically distraught environments. And so, so he's been, I covered him in Nevada on Saturday. I think he's going to be in Florida, I think, on Halloween. I just thought I would rather go trick-or-treating than to a presidential rally, but I guess you may not have to choose. And so he's really hitting the ground running, and voters are responding to it.
Yeah, there's a lot of smart pieces being written right now about how this is like deja vu all over again. Like, we are seeing a lot of trends of 2016 leading right up to Election Day in terms of Democrats being really repulsed by President Trump,
Right.
but Republicans and some independents supporting him. And so we'll
yeah.
see how that plays out.
One
in the
thing
polls.
I expect to see that'll be a repeat of 2016, and we obviously can talk about it after the fact, is I think there'll be a sizable number of voters backing the GOP who haven't been as vocal about their support for the GOP, and therefore perhaps throwing some of our predictions off.
Now, I do have to point out, like Dave Weigel, one of our colleagues, was just pointing out, as other people have as well, that when you look at like the generic ballot, like ask people, are you voting for Republicans or Democrats? Some of the latest polling found that both parties have a net negative rating, but Democrats still have a 9-point lead on the general election ballot. So the wins are still at Democrats' backs in terms of the House. But
Nobody's happy.
Nobody's happy.
Pleased. And I think, we've seen a large number of people become really disengaged because of it all, not wanting to dive into politics because they just see the bickering that could possibly have led to bomb scares, and they just want to pivot to something else.
Gene, what are folks saying on chat?
Yeah, we have a comment from Toilet Paper who says he respectfully disagrees with you, Eugene. While both political parties are divisive and have always been, I doubt has always been as big as now, and that's mostly due to Trump.
I would completely agree with that.
I feel like you would agree with that, actually.
I certainly agree with that. I think we now have ways in which you can disagree that didn't exist 8 years ago. We get hate tweets and emails and bombs and Slack, Instagram. I have people coming on my Instagram account, sharing their disagreement with what it is that we write. And I think in part it's because we do see what's coming out of the top. The Washington Post had a story this week about a man on an airplane physically assaulting a woman and saying he could do it because the president does it. And that's where we are right now. And I think we see some of the activists on other sides of issues than Trump, perhaps not always responding in a way that is the most civil either. But I think the person and the team that can have the most impact on how we discuss politics is the party that is currently in control and power right now, and that's the GOP.
President Trump's trying to seal the deal out on the campaign trail, get his message out, encourage his supporters to go vote. I want to point out there's a lot of interesting motion happening online, like working around commercials on TV, even working around commercials on the radio, where of course there's a sort of a captive audience. But there's this Knock the Vote project created by a group called Acronym that's supporting progressive candidates in particular. What they're trying to do, though, is make these like viral ads online that will goad people into voting, like get your attention, grab you by the shoulders, make you think a little bit, maybe even make you mad, but go out and vote. And I heard a story about this on NPR this morning, and the CEO of this group was interviewed and said one of the things that they're doing is that they're trying to flip the script on these phone calls of white people calling the police when African Americans are going about their everyday business, permit patty, et cetera. I'm sure you guys have heard about that. So they're flipping the script a little bit.
Yeah.
And they're calling the 911 call on white people who are choosing not to vote. So I want to share this ad with you. Take a look at this. This is from Knock the Vote.
The coffee here sucks.
You know what else sucks, Todd? Voter suppression.
How did you know my name?
Do you plan on voting?
No.
Why is that?
Because the parties don't represent me? The system's broken. Am I right?
911. I like to report a raggedy-ass hipster who thinks he's going to be the next Tarantino. I know that's going to happen. He doesn't plan on voting. Oh, I can describe him. He's white. Good luck with that movie.
Will you please be in it?
No, dude.
Something else that Acronym created was an ad of elderly white Americans saying, I'm going to vote. You young people aren't going to vote. Here are all the issues I care about. The issues that you care about aren't going to get heard at the polls because you're not turning out to vote. So they're kind of pushing buttons that way.
Yeah, guilting people to vote into voting hasn't always been effective. In 2016, I covered Obama's last speech at the Congressional Black Caucus, and I remember him telling black voters that if they did not show up in rates identical to what they did for him, he would be hurt or embarrassed or disappointed, and black voters didn't show up. They did not. I think
Trump's kind of using the same message though to voters right now.
Absolutely. He said, and Trump has actually said, if we lose, it's not going to be my fault. He's going to put the blame on his supporters.
Right.
I think I think one of the best ways to communicate to blacks that they need to support you is just to get your message out there and communicate to them that you can make America as great as they're hoping it will be, without telling them if you don't show up, the people you don't like are gonna win. But yeah, I mean, I just don't know it to be effective. But yeah.
Have you seen that ad before, Gene?
I have not actually. I
Right.
think my face was like, you know, a little surprised.
There you go. Hey, I want to talk about early voting real quick because
Yeah.
early voting is open in a lot of states. We had reports this week from Texas, which just opened up, that they have had blockbuster numbers
Yeah.
turning out. The Secretary of State in Texas says over 400,000 people voted yesterday. The vote tally is up over 600,000 already, and they're seeing it everywhere, especially in urban areas, though, around Dallas,
Yeah.
around Austin.
In Atlanta, we saw some large numbers in the Georgia gubernatorial race, and I know they have a couple of congressional races there. So maybe this would be the year where midterm records are broken. We'll
But
see.
the question is, and as you were saying, our colleague Philip Bump was writing about, if it's people who are already super enthused
Right.
and we're going to go vote anyway,
Yeah.
is it drawing out new people to vote? Is it
Yeah.
drawing out people who might not otherwise be motivated, or is it just getting people out early?
Awesome.
But there's a handful of states that don't even have early voting. There's about a
Right.
dozen states
Yeah.
that do not, and some of them have very closely watched races. In particular, Missouri.
Yeah.
No early voting there. You got to show up on election day.
Yeah, and I'm interested in Missouri. I used to live in Kansas City, and they're having a big Senate race in Missouri right now. And we have our reporter, John Gerber, on the Hill to cover it. And maybe he can tell us some more about it.
That's right. Hey, Eugene. So yeah, we've got a couple candidates in the race. The main one to look at is Claire McCaskill. She's a senator since 2006. She comes from a political family, right? Both of her parents were worked in politics in Missouri. She's basically been bred for this since she was a kid. In the 80s, she was a state legislator. She really established herself as tough on crime. She really kind of has carved out this role for herself as a centrist, if not even borderline conservative Democrat, which is what you have to do in Missouri. So she spends a lot of time in the rural districts and in places that are frankly not going to vote for her in the election, but she kind of prides herself on being a centrist, being, you know, she doesn't spend a lot of time on the more liberal wings of her party. Things like abortion, which is even an issue that she calls herself pro-choice herself. She's kind of famous for avoiding that kind of issue, and she's very quick to talk about things like birth control instead. So she's the kind of Missouri Democrat that has been able to survive for now 12 years and is looking for another term. On the other hand, you have Josh Hawley, who is a 38-year-old attorney general, also a Missouri native, and he's a Yale grad. He's a formidable opponent. I mean, he is a proud conservative, and even though he has a lot less government experience than McCaskill, he's accomplished a lot for his time and his age. He's written a book. He's had some really high-level clerkships, including for John Roberts, the current Chief Justice on the Supreme Court. So, you know, he's been kind of coming hard at her, and you can take the polls for what you will, but one thing that's clear as you track the polls in this race is it's gotten closer and closer, and it's looking like it's shaping up to be a tight race in November.
Indeed. I really appreciated you talking a bit about the urban-rural divide in Missouri. When I was working there, we would talk about Kansas City and St. Louis were Missouri, and in the middle you have Missouri. And so there are a lot of issues that these Americans and residents see differently. What are some of the issues you're seeing dominating this race?
Yeah, I'm working on the pronunciation myself. I mean, the issues it depends who you ask, to be honest. McCaskill, if it was up to her, it would be all local, right? She has spent decades now talking about local bread and butter issues, and that's where she's the most comfortable. You know, things like healthcare, things like education, combating the opioid epidemic. These are the kind of things that hit Missourians on a day-to-day level. This is the kind of stuff, that's the language that she speaks. That is that is where she really thrives, and that's where she's won over Missourian voters in the past. Even more national issues, she's most skilled at bringing those back to a local level. You know, when she talks about things like Trump's trade policies and the tariffs, she talks about she talks about how the Trump's tariffs have what she says adversely affected the prices of soybeans for Missouri farmers. So that's her instinct, and those are the issues she wants to talk about. On the other hand, you have Hawley, who really likes talking about these big, divisive national issues, right? So that's the Second Amendment, that's sanctuary cities, that's building the wall. You know, he loves to talk about building the wall, and this is, you know, Missouri is a state that's 700 miles from the Texas-Mexico border, but it doesn't matter. This is something that riles up voters, and it works. I mean, McCaskill, this is an issue that she takes pride in too. She is actually she's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Homeland Security Committee, and she proudly, you know, has responded to this, and she's got backing from Border Patrol, and so it's a divisive issue, but something that she's had to come back hard against, and she's put together campaign ads like one that I think we have for you, and where she really kind of boasts her strong border bona fide. So take a look.
Claire McCaskill understands the threats to our border.
A leader dedicated to keeping our country strong and safe.
Those ads against McCaskill on immigration just aren't true. She was one of only 4 Democrats to vote to end sanctuary cities.
Votes to strengthen and secure our border.
We endorse President Trump and Claire McCaskill because of their records on border security.
Take it from us.
No senator is tougher on securing the border than Claire McCaskill.
I'm Claire McCaskill, and I approve this message.
And then, of course, you know, you have current events, you have everyday issues that come up. Things like, you know, the recent and, you know, hotly debated nomination of Judge Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. That's something that Josh Hawley came out in strong support for Judge Kavanaugh and really attacked McCaskill on. McCaskill, for her part, actually in the end ended up siding with her party, with the Democrats, and not supporting Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, but she actually went out of her way to say that she was not standing against him for the allegations of sexual misconduct against him, but for a completely separate issue about campaign finance. So this, again, is kind of the tightrope that she has to walk to appeal to Missouri voters, and that's what we're looking at.
Absolutely. We know there are a lot of Senate races happening right now. Is there anything unique about this Missouri Senate race? Anything special that you would say sets it apart from some of the other competitions?
Oh, absolutely. I actually think that Missouri could be one of the most important elections of all of the midterms coming up. And there's a couple of reasons for that. As we know, for the past 2 years, the Republicans have had the White House, the House, and the Senate, and that's been a problem for Democrats in passing laws, in fighting nominations from the president, like this Judge Kavanaugh nomination process. So the Democrats are going to do everything they can to take back at least one chamber in this election. And they needed to do that not only to pass laws and to do nominations, but also for things like forming and running committees and things like, you know, Russia investigations and other special committees. I mean, they really need to have leadership in one of the chambers to do this. So there's talk and numbers that look like there's more of a chance for Democrats to potentially take back the House. But the Senate, as we saw with Kavanaugh, again, it has real implications for what the Democrats are able to accomplish and keep from happening in some cases. So in the Senate, which is only by 2 seats, as you mentioned before in the program, the Democrats are behind, they now have, in November, 10 seats where Democrats are running in states. There are 10 seats where Democratic senators are running in districts that voted for Trump in 2016. And Missouri is one of the most formidable kind of examples of those states. Just to give you an example of the Republican swing that it's taking. In 2008, Obama lost Missouri, but only by a half percentage point. Then come 2012, he lost again. That time it was almost by 10 points. And then 2016, Trump won by 20 points. So you kind of take that more Republican rightward swing of Missouri, and that's the context that this race with national implications is having on a state level. And Josh Hawley is really trying to capitalize on that momentum. So last month, Trump came to Missouri. He gave a rally where he was there to support Josh Hawley. At the same time, Hawley was there standing next to Trump, and sometimes, you know, it was hard at times to determine who was actually campaigning for who. So I don't know, take a look.
And I tell you what, he's delivering big for the state of Missouri and the United States of America, isn't he? I mean, big. He said he was going to stand up for American workers, and he is. Bringing back jobs from overseas, paychecks on the rise. He cut your taxes. How about that? He said, the president said he was going to put pro-Constitution judges on the bench, and he has. He has.
So that's what we're working with. I mean, that's the question for this race. I mean, can a centrist Democrat like Claire McCaskill, who has spent years establishing herself in the Senate, who has distanced herself from the more liberal wings of her party, hold out in a Trump state? Or, you know, on the other side, will these prevailing sentiments of nationalism and anti-immigration and other sentiments that are so prevalent across the country now win out and unseat a Democrat? This is a race with national implications, and it's being decided by a very small slice of the electorate in Missouri. So it's no surprise that all senators and all Americans, frankly, are going to be watching Missouri for what happens in November. Eugene.
Indeed, that'll be quite interesting to see, considering that it's called the Show Me State. So we will see what they show us on Election Day.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Gerberg. Yeah, thanks so much. You know, this question of just who is motivated to come out and vote and how people are motivated to vote sounds like it'll resonate in places like Missouri. Are they being motivated by fear? Or are they motivated by wanting to see active change? But Jean, you've been tracking social media commentary and content about how people are trying to motivate each other to show up to vote or goad each other into showing up to vote.
Yeah, I want to show you guys my favorite meme. It was tweeted a couple days ago. Let's pull it up on the screen right now. Me during a home invasion, and the burglar tells me that they haven't registered to vote. I love this one because it's hilarious. It's a stock image. I believe that's probably a stock image for privacy theft, like social media theft or whatever. Yeah. But it just seems so nonsensical that it should just be on a computer. Sure. And this is hilarious. But that has like, gosh, how many retweets does it have? Like over 100,000 retweets, I think. Wow. 35,000 retweets, over 116,000 likes. So, you know, people are kind of shaming each other on social media too. Yeah. To kind of go vote. There was also that magazine that
yes, Elle
magazine that put that fake tweet up about Kim and Kanye filing for divorce, which was fake, but then it led to a voter registration link. Yeah, they got backlash for that.
I clicked that link so fast because I'm interested. I'm sure there's a Trump angle when we're talking about Kanye and Kim because there has been in the past. Yeah. But yeah, I think they
got a lot of backlash for that, though.
Yeah, they
From
got
people
a lot.
in the media were like journalists were like, okay, that actually is fake news. Like, don't confuse the issue with actual fake news.
Especially about something very serious. Yeah. I mean, we're voting about very real issues: immigration, the economy, national security. I think this presidency and campaign's gotten us enough pop culture news that we don't have to make any up. Yeah.
2 weeks left before Election Day. Everyone's trying to deliver their closing messages. We talked a little bit earlier, Eugene, but I want to go into it now. President Trump is on the stump. He's making a lot of claims. Some are just not true.
Right.
But it still seems to be drumming up support and getting crowds to turn out at his rallies. I want to share one soundbite of President Trump talking about this caravan of migrants that's in Mexico right now. Listen to this.
Go into the middle of the caravan, take your cameras and search. Okay?
So you don't know for sure.
Take your camera, go into the middle, and search. You're going to find MS-13, you're going to find Middle Eastern, you're going to find everything. And guess what? We're not allowing them in our country. We want safety. We want safety. What's happening on the border? What's happening on the border was caused by the Democrats because they won't let anybody change immigration laws that are horrible.
All right, President Trump speaking. You can hear there obviously the noise is pretty intense there because he's on the lawn, but you get the content of what he's saying. He has claimed that there are Middle Easterners as part of this caravan. Vice President Trump doubled down on that yesterday here at the Washington Post, basically saying it was inconceivable that Middle Easterners were not in the caravan.
Yeah.
As people pointed out, A, what's so scary about Middle Easterners? And
Right.
then B, like, where's the proof? President Trump kind of reversed himself on this last night, though. In a more extended interview, he sort of walked that back, which is a classic case of administration officials stepping out on the limb of the tree with the president, and then the president like sawing off the limb behind them. Because he sort of walked that back a little bit. But he's making a lot of claims. He knows immigration is a hot button issue for his supporters that appear to be designed to stoke up fears.
Yeah, because it's worked in the past. I mean, we are seeing voters respond to these unproven claims or even myths or lies or false statements with anxiety. We had some reporters on the ground talking to voters in Montana who were very afraid about these immigrants leaving Central and Honduras America and coming to their lake homes in the winter in Montana. And we've seen no examples of that. And this stoking fear, this fear mongering has been really effective. And it's been interesting in seeing the defense, place of defense that it's put the Democrats in, trying to explain to voters why this caravan isn't as concerning as Trump is portraying it to be, which is not an easy argument to make. I mean, the reality is there are more questions than answers about what is going on, and people want to know what will happen. Will everybody be admitted into the United States? What will that look like? Where will they go? But I think it is reminding us that how we vote does have international implications in terms of policy and our relationships with other foreign leaders and what could happen next. We had this great piece published on the Washington Post earlier today, and the title of it said, "The border is tougher to cross than ever, but there's still one way into America." And it's looking at asylum claims and migrant families. It's a great visual. Nick Maroff did it. You should check it out. We got an email for it earlier today, and I spent some time on it. I learned a lot.
It's fascinating. Something else that President Trump is saying is that Republicans are going to institute tax cuts for the middle class before the election, which is impossible logistically because Congress is out until after the election, so everybody can go home and campaign. Remember, those House members are all defending their seats. They all have to get out there on the campaign trail, even if they're in a pretty safe district. So Washington is crickets right now in terms of activity on Capitol Hill. President Trump, however, made the claim, and then everybody kind of scrambled to try to figure out how they could back that up. So let's listen to President Trump's new tax cuts plan.
We're giving a middle income tax reduction of about 10%. We're doing it now for middle income people. This is not for business, this is for middle. That's on top of the tax decrease that we've already done.
I'm sending Gene a story to throw in chat that is so great that relates to this. Our colleagues Phil Rucker and Ashley Parker filed this piece about how the president makes these assertions and then everybody in his administration tries to scramble to put some facts on the board to back it up. It starts like this. The great election eve middle class tax cut began not as a factual proposal, but as a false promise. So now people are scrambling and Republicans are saying, maybe we could do some kind of a resolution to promise to do a tax cut later if we retain our majorities. But people are having to scramble. And I just saw reporting from Erica Warner saying that the top Republican on the Finance Committee says, like, there's no there there. Like,
Yeah.
Orrin Hatch was like, we got nothing on this right now. So.
And I think the odd thing about pledging to do something in Congress that Congress cannot do by the deadline that Trump has claimed is that it's actually just reminded voters that these tax cuts have not benefited the middle class as the GOP has promised, because if it actually had, there'd be no need to go ahead and actually have a middle income tax cut. And so Democrats, I don't know how effective they have been at like zooming in on that, because we have data showing that the majority of the people who've benefited from the tax cuts have been corporations and really rich people. But I'm sure if the Republicans don't win the House and the Senate, Trump will say, well, we tried to give you middle class tax cuts because I told you we were going to do a resolution if we won, but you all didn't vote for us.
Yeah,
no, we can't.
Orrin Hatch, this top Republican on the Finance Committee, said it would require monumental effort for the Senate to pass a proposal, and that it's highly unlikely the Senate would vote after the election even on this 10% middle class tax cut. The real question is, though, how many people are going deeper than a tweet or a headline or what they hear the president say at a rally and digging into the facts and trying to learn, like, what is truth and what is not. Gene?
I want to kind of zoom out on what you said earlier about the tax cuts and how not effective they've been for the middle class, right? And you mentioned the Democrats. I haven't really heard like a unifying, strong message from Democrats about the tax cuts. And we're just 2 weeks away from the midterms. So like there's a message there, and I'm not sure. Like am I wrong though? Like
I've heard some people, but that hasn't been the overwhelming message I've seen from candidates on the left. They certainly could campaign and say, hey, these tax cuts did not hit the middle class as promised. I think a lot of Democrats are campaigning on character issues and integrity issues, as Hillary Clinton had tried to in 2016, and that wasn't a big concern for the base. But independent voters, independent women in the suburbs supposedly are being more turned off by Trumpism than they were in 2016, and maybe that'll work. Who knows?
I think a lot of Americans don't know yet how the tax cuts have hit them or not, because they haven't filed their taxes yet. They haven't seen their returns for this year, so a lot of it's kind of a big question mark in voters' minds. Healthcare is an issue where Democrats are trying to get some mileage. Fascinating turn. We talked about this last week. Republicans are trying to do the same. But I want to show one ad from Joe Manchin, Democrat running to keep his seat in the Senate in West Virginia. It's a tough re-election fight. He combines a little bit of his like rootin' tootin' West Virginia roots with his support of health care. Watch this.
That's me, shooting the cap and trade bill, because it was bad for West Virginia. Hey, I haven't changed. I might be a few years older, but I'll still take on anyone that messes with West Virginia. Now the threat is Patrick Morrisey's lawsuit to take away health care from people with pre-existing conditions. He is just dead wrong, and that ain't going to happen. I'm Joe Manchin, and I approve this message because for me, it's all about West Virginia.
All right, so you guys might remember Joe Manchin a few years ago shot the cap and trade bill in an ad. Boom. He's doing it again.
Yep.
West Virginians love guns. So there you go. He's trying to sort of show his bona fides there. He's also, though, pointing out that Republican attorneys general across the country are part of a lawsuit that would essentially defang Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. It would roll back the protections that are now in place. And so he's saying, look, I'm the guy who can defend you from this.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating. In that ad, you get Joe giving, hey, I can connect with the conservatives, and I'm also very pro-Obama at the same time, which is peak Joe Manchin, right? That is who he consistently shows himself to be, and it's getting much more difficult to be that in these days and times. But West Virginia was one of those states we saw that backed Trump in 2016, but really expressed concern and outrage when they saw the Republican Party look as if they were trying to dismantle Obamacare because so many residents depend on it for their health care.
I will point out that one of Patrick Morrisey's big closing messages is that Democrats are going to impeach the president. And a vote for Joe Manchin is a vote to impeach the president. Dave Weigel, our colleague, said that this ad he's doing is constitutionally problematic for a number of reasons. He says that he's going to protect President Trump if he's elected, but he also sort of gets it wrong in terms of how impeachment would actually work. That's something that would happen in the House. The Senate can remove from office. But people like Joe Manchin are not advocating to impeach the president at all.
Most
part
Democrats
of the Democrat,
aren't.
that's right. Even leadership like Nancy Pelosi is saying our goal is not to try to impeach the president. Some Democrats are giving a more nuanced message of we do want to dig into Russian interference in the election. We do want to see the tax returns of the President of the United States, but they are trying to take impeachment off the table. And Republicans are trying to throw it back on them like a hot potato.
Yeah, most of the Democrats that I've seen lead with impeachment are people who are not even in Congress right now.
No, like Tom Steyer, who's got a lot of money. He's trying to, and Democrats are like, quiet, stop.
Yeah, they're trying to promise.
You can donate money, but stop talking impeachment.
Yeah, well, because to your point earlier, I think Democrats and even many Republicans have a lot of questions about Russia, questions about the whole Kavanaugh situation, questions about tax returns, and they need Trump's people around to some degree to answer questions. And quite frankly, if the Trump team is as innocent and not guilty as they say they are, then they should be able to answer the questions that should come from the left and the right as well. And so I think there's been a lot of stifling on the impeachment talk from the Democrats. And I don't even know that most of the base is prioritizing impeachment as a top issue. I think they just want to know what's actually happening and get some questions answered.
Gene?
Yeah, there's a good observation from Grounded Pikachu. He or she says, they say, it doesn't really matter if he gets impeachment wrong, considering the average American does not even know how impeachment works.
Yeah.
So running on that issue, I mean, you know, it's just like I couldn't even tell you exactly how that process works. You know?
Yeah. No. I mean, it's more complex, but I don't know how many Americans think that the answer to all of our problems is just getting rid of Trump.
But if Morrissey's saying a vote for the guy against me is a vote to impeach Trump, that might stick in voters' minds, even if it's not actually true.
Sure.
Once again, I want to show one more Democratic ad since we saw some footage of President Trump there a little bit. This is a House race, and this is kind of interesting. This is in Michigan. Haley Stevens is a Democrat running against Lena Epstein, who supported Trump. Epstein was Trump's Michigan chair prior to running for this congressional seat. And Haley Stevens does a shout out to none other than President Obama. Remember that guy? Watch this.
President Obama's two biggest wins for Michigan families were the auto rescue and healthcare reform. I'm Haley Stevens, and I was Chief of Staff to President Obama's auto rescue. We saved over 200,000 jobs and strengthened Michigan's advanced manufacturing economy. That's our future. Now that Donald Trump is trying to sabotage Obamacare, I'm running for Congress to protect and improve it, to lower costs and get more people covered. I approve this message because I know how to deliver for Michigan.
So Haley Stevens talking about President Obama, which a few years ago was like not someone you necessarily, unless you were in a very liberal district, you wouldn't necessarily be waving that flag and saying, look, this is my guy. But she's talking about the auto industry and also healthcare.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's been a lot of reporting right now that acknowledges that the economy is doing well overall right now in ways that it hadn't in the past, but that actually started during the Obama administration, and I think people who are tied to that want to get credit for that. I just thought it was telling that Stevens in a blue-collar area was taking this approach, because the Washington Post actually has an article in today about how the economy has been doing very well overall for blue-collar men and who don't have education beyond high school, but not as well for women. And so I would imagine that the optics of her in that campaign ad communicates, I want to go ahead and help women get this economic renaissance that so many men had as well.
Eugene, you've been writing about some of these unforced errors and ways that candidates are just hurting themselves. I want you to talk about a couple of examples of ways that candidates aren't doing themselves any favors.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the situations candidates have stepped in, especially in some of the big races in the South, be it the Georgia governor's race or the Florida governor's race, have been just really divisive in terms of race. We are in a period where we're seeing just multiple culture wars just taking place in ways we hadn't in the past, in states that are more diverse in ways they've never been in the past. And so just people are finding themselves offending voters and entire groups of people that they need to vote. I mean, these races are going to be won by the margins and by a couple of percentage points. And instead of being as divisive as we're seeing a lot of these ads be, you would just think that people would use midterms to win people to their party that did not vote for their party during the presidential election. And we're not seeing a lot of that.
You wrote about this super PAC that was trying to help an Arkansas Republican, French Hill, congressman. They made this radio ad. This group is called Black Americans for the President's Agenda. I want to hear an excerpt of it, but first, Representative Hill ended up distancing himself from it.
He was not tied to the ad, to the group Black Americans for the President's Agenda. And we found out that actually, unsurprisingly, a large number of the donors for this group were not actually Black Americans. But French Hill found it despicable. And I mean, if some people watch it, maybe they'll have an idea of why.
Yeah, let's listen to a little bit of this. We'll hear audio because it's a radio ad.
Right.
So listen to this.
What do you think about what's happening in Washington?
Our Congressman French Hill and the Republicans know that it's dangerous to change the presumption of innocence to a presumption of guilt, especially for black men.
I'm voting to keep Congressman French Hill and the Republicans because we have to protect our men and boys. We can't afford to let white Democrats take us back to bad old days of race verdicts, life sentences, and lynchings when a white girl screams rape.
Paid for by Black Americans for the President's Agenda. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.
That was after the Kavanaugh fight. As you pointed out, Congressman Hill called it appalling. But identity politics being inserted into this race in a way that's very simple and yet very complicated. Very simple in how egregious it is, but complicated in terms of what ultimately the reaction by listeners and viewers will be.
Indeed, and a lot of black voters listening to the ad were frustrated with the lack of accuracy and historical context. So arguing that Democrats pushing back on Kavanaugh will push back on black men and black boys falsely accused of sexually assault more than Republicans would also seems to ignore the fact that President Trump himself falsely accused and believed that some black and Latino teenagers sexually assaulted a woman known as the Central Park Five. And the Washington Post has written about it quite a bit. And so it just ended up being divisive and frustrating to many people who really want to see these congressional races be about the issues and not about hypothetical racism and sexism if one party gets in control.
Not just Republicans, though, who are stepping in it. I want to mention briefly Heidi Heitkamp, running a very tough re-election campaign in North Dakota, put out an ad that listed women and specific names of women who were allegedly survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. This was in response to comments made by her opponent, Kevin Cramer, and it sounds like it was intended to support women and sort of bash Cramer for comments he made. But it really backfired. Yeah. Because women who were listed in the ad didn't necessarily know they were going to be included and got really upset.
Yeah, it was really sad.
I didn't even know about that.
Yeah, and some of the women in the ad were fearful for their safety, for financial retribution, being outed, going public for accusing men of sexual and domestic assault. And Heidi Heitkamp can't afford to lose like one vote at this point. It's a really, really tight race.
She apologized.
She absolutely
said, I deeply regret this mistake.
She absolutely did. It obviously was not something she did on purpose, especially after making so much national news for voting against Kavanaugh because she expressed just deep concern for the realities that victims of sexual assault face. And so, but yeah, I think we're getting in this space in the race where everything's really tight and people are anxious and sloppy and people are being harmed in the process.
So, this conversation about sort of women and their role in this as voters as well as candidates is so essential, and we can hear more about that in our next segment. We're going to talk to Hannah Jewell. Hannah Jewell joins us now from our upstairs studio. Hannah, great to see you. Hannah's been reporting for the Washington Post on Snapchat, covering the top issues of the midterm election. Hannah, we'll kick it over to you.
Thanks so much, Libby. I am very excited to bring you Alice Lee, a video journalist here at the Washington Post, and Kayla Epstein, who is a social media editor, among other things. You do a little bit of everything. You're an ace reporter, both these women. And we're talking today about women in these elections. There's been a lot of buzz about, is this another year of the woman in the style of 1992 when record women joined Congress? And here are these ladies who have come to join us, who we're going to be talking about today. But first of all, both of you, along with our colleague on graphics, Sarah Hashemi, made this amazing series about women in politics in these midterm elections. And Alice, tell me why you decided to make this series and why you chose to divide it up into the 3 videos that you did.
Well, I think pretty early on, Kayla and I had actually started brainstorming it together because we had noticed that there was a lot of coverage around women who were interested in running for office. There was a lot of energy we were seeing after the Women's March, and there was a lot of just general interest in terms of women signing up for classes to learn how to run for office or how to just become more actively engaged. And so we sort of sat together, and it kind of started off as just a conversation about what we were noticing, and then thinking about ways that we could try to streamline our coverage and really focus on this phenomenon we were witnessing. And so, you know, I do video, and so I knew pretty early on that I wanted to make it some kind of video series. And then we sort of discussed more just about how it was a very, there was just so many different facets to explore, and so that's how we sort of decided to break it into three videos.
So you have the first one, which is about the number of women who are running. And actually, Kayla, I know you've also worked on a great graphic that we can have Jean drop into chat for us, because Jean is an ally of women and people will want to see this. So in this graphic, which is very interactive, that you can click through all these headshots, you've addressed which women, how many women are favored to win in November, how many are in competitive races, and how many are not likely to win. And in this, you can scroll through and you can actually see the sheer number of them, but perhaps more with all the chat we've been hearing about how many women are running, how few are actually definitely going to win, how a little more competitive, but how most are not likely to win. So what do you want people to take away from this graphic and looking through it?
Yeah, it's a lot of what you said. One of our intentions, just as it was with the video series, with this graphic, was to showcase these individual women and their individual stories. So you'll notice their faces are really prominent, because I think we talk a lot about the statistics this year, the numbers,
the number
records,
of women, yeah.
And there's sort of, you know, this big mass, but you really want to talk about these women as individuals, because every woman is different. She has her own story. She's running her own race.
On that note, we talked a little bit previously about how Katie Hill's a candidate who is sort of embodying why there are so many women running this year. So we can take a look at some interviews that she has put out there that are not from your video, but let's take a look at those videos and see a little from Katie Hill.
The biggest thing for me is that I'm someone who has dedicated my career to serving our community. I spent my entire life here. I understand the needs of the people of this district because I've lived them. I don't need polling to tell me what they are. I've experienced them myself, my friends, my family members, my neighbors. And I believe that our community deserves better. We deserve representation that is truly of, by, and for the people, not sold out to special interest groups or corporations, and instead is working towards progress on the issues that matter most to all of us.
So Kayla, is Katie Hill a sort of a poster child of the type of Democratic women who are running? How did she come to run for office this term?
Yeah, she's pretty exemplary of a trend we're seeing a lot, which is that a woman who was inspired by Trump's election, who actually a better word is angered by it, decided that they wanted to do something about it, and the best way to do that was to run for office themselves. So Katie, like many other of the candidates we're seeing this year, figured out how to get involved in a race. She signed up for her primary in California's 25th district, and she beat out her primary opponents to take on a Republican incumbent, Steve Knight. And she's raising millions of dollars. She's raised about $6 million as of the last report. And you know, with all this money and all this attention, the fact remains, though, that she's in a very competitive race. Right now, it's basically tied. And so it sort of shows that a lot of these Democratic women who are running as challengers. They're running in very competitive districts. And so we don't really know until Election Day what the outcome of all of this is going to be.
I know you've been very hesitant to say, when people want to know, could this be the year that we get record numbers of women into Congress and into governor houses? And I wrote down that we have the record number of women who've ever been in the Senate is 23 in 2018, right now. In the House, 84, that has been the case since 2013 to now. And the most female governors we've ever had at once is 9. I believe right now it's 6. So why are you hesitant to say that with a record number of women running for office that we might not break these records?
Well, if you look at that graphic you were mentioning before, so many of these women are in competitive races, and I was going and checking the polling numbers today, and some polls have one candidate up by 2, and then other polls have their opponent down by 2. These things are so close. We still have 2 weeks. Voters are really starting to tune in. The messaging is really getting turned up. The rhetoric is getting turned up. And so we can't really, I'm a little cautious about saying for certain as to whether we're going to break any records.
Because you're a good, cautious journalist.
I'm very, very cautious and paranoid.
As you should be.
I think that it's possible. A lot has to go right, particularly for Democrats. We will see some races, like in Arizona, for instance, where we are guaranteed to see a woman elected to the Senate because both of the candidates are women. So. Yeah, we will see what happens.
That brings us to Martha McSally in Arizona, who's running for Senate against women, as you were saying. And the second video in your series is about Republican women for office. So let's take a look at a little bit from Martha McSally interviews that you did.
We have a lot to do in this country, and I am partnering with this president because so much is at stake for boys and girls, for men and women, and to have everybody be able to live the American dream. That's why he was elected, and that's why I'm partnering with him. I used to say this is a fighter pilot. I don't want people to define me as a female fighter pilot. I happen to be a woman, but I want to be known as a warrior and a fighter pilot who served and led and flew in combat and made a difference for the troops on the ground. Same thing in Washington, D.C.
So how does a Republican woman running in 2018 navigate the world of identity politics and selling herself as a woman versus a Democrat, for instance?
Well, Republican women talk about their gender differently this year. They are less willing to focus on the fact that they are women, and they want to focus more on their qualifications and the policies that they're running on. If you ask them about it, and we asked Martha McSally about it, they will say, yes, I acknowledge this, but it is more about the experience, it's more about what I bring to the table.
And Martha McSally is, like many Democratic women, also is talking a lot about her military experience. And why do you think that is? We've seen so many ads from women this cycle that are like literally, you know, videos of them like crashing helicopters and shooting guns and stuff. And why do you think that is?
I mean, it's part of her background. It's part of her experience. You know, military experience for men and women is seen as pretty great to have in a candidate. It shows that they are public servants. It shows that they have discipline, that they're serious, that they have sacrificed for their country. And so I think McSally is just drawing on a really important part of her life and a really important part of what she sees are her qualifications.
Do you think there's limitations that Republican women face while campaigning and speaking and debating and anything when they are facing, when they're running with the support of a president, as Martha McSally is, who, you know, speaks about women in a way that some women might not enjoy? How do they navigate that?
Well, you'll see with McSally that she actually criticized President Trump in 2016 after the Access Hollywood tape came out, and it also looked like he was not going to win. You know, she said that she basically said that she didn't find it acceptable, but now that he has won, that he has really become this figurehead in the Republican Party, and that not just the women, men as well, have aligned themselves with him. She really has to sort of play to that part of the Republican base that likes Trump, because they have to vote for her too. And so you've seen her align herself with him, you've seen her appear at the White House with him, you've seen her support his policies, and she's a conservative as well. So, you know, these are also Republican policies that she's supporting, but you do see these Republican women, like Republican men, having to be aware of the fact that Republican voters like President Trump.
It is a dance that everybody is playing either up front or behind the scenes in these elections, is the relationship to Trump, how their constituency voted, if they voted for Trump or not, and how far to hop aboard the Trump train. The third video in your guys' series was about women of color running for office, both Democrats and Republicans. And we have a little clip of your interviews with Lauren Underwood. So let's take a look at that.
We cannot mess up, we cannot make mistakes. I don't get the same number of do-overs that my opponents in the primary got. And so what did we do? We were excellent. I get really excited about this moment and the opportunities as a young woman and person of color to hold this role and to advocate and work on and introduce policies that could help our future.
So Alice, tell us about Lauren Underwood. Where is she running? Who's she running against? What are her chances?
Yeah, so Lauren Underwood, like Katie Hill, is running against an incumbent. She's running in Illinois' 14th Congressional District. She's a first-time candidate. She's young, she's a registered nurse. She has worked on healthcare in the Obama administration before, so she's not new to politics in that way. But you know, she is someone who has a lot of support, and she ran in a primary against 6 male opponents and handily beat all of them.
Is it the case that she got more votes than the other 6 combined?
Yes, I believe that's true.
That's a pretty devastating victory, I'd say.
Yes, it is.
And especially as she was saying that she has felt the pressure to be excellent, in her words.
Right, absolutely. And you know, in her interview, and she talks about this very candidly, is that as a woman, and particularly as a woman of color, there's just different standards that she has to meet, that she has to qualify as a candidate. And so she has been very, very a force to be reckoned with in many ways, and many of the polls show that in this district where she is running against an incumbent, it's a very tight race. He is still, according to a few polls, a couple of points ahead of her, but that's pretty impressive for someone who's a first-time candidate who is running in a district where the incumbent is running again. So she talks a lot about you know, her intersection of identities. She talks about the fact that she's running in a district that's not majority-minority, and how she is able to really capture the different interests of the people who live in that district.
Do both of you find that it's something new that women are willing to discuss the limitations and the doors being shut in their faces, as we've seen in another political ad? Is it new for women and women of color to discuss discrimination that they've faced in this cycle, do you think?
I think that we're seeing a little bit more women who are willing to be candid about that. We've certainly seen that women have made that a part of their platform in a way perhaps that we haven't seen in previous election cycles.
I remember even Hillary Clinton seemed a little unwilling to say, I faced sexism, and use the sexism word. And it just feels like there's been more of that. Would you agree?
I think that these candidates are running with a very clear idea of what they're up against, but also they're not letting it stop them. And so they're saying, this is my identity, this is who I am, but also this is how I'm going to serve you because I need you to vote for me. And so while you have candidates like Lauren who are very candid about the challenges they face, they don't really let that stop them, and they don't let past convention about what it means or what it takes to be a female candidate change the way that they've decided to campaign.
I should add that our viewers on Twitch should be very free to ask any questions of any of us about the topic of women in these elections, and we can get to at the end of our talk. So Alice, you've also been on the campaign trail with Deb Haaland, and so tell us about this candidate a little bit, or we'll take a look at some of your interviews with her first. Let's take a look at that.
In any picture that you would see of Congress, no Native woman or Native girl has ever seen themselves in that picture. Like, I'm passionate about the Indian vote. I'm passionate about not just Native Americans, but any underrepresented communities having a voice. So if I can inspire young Native girls to step out and even run for student body president, I think that we have a future with more Native women in it.
So what did you learn about Deb Haaland on the trail with her?
I learned that she's very popular, that people really loved seeing her when she was down there. So I went down there during July 4th, and she was doing a lot of parades. She was walking, she was handing out candy, and she was really just engaging with people, and people were really excited about her. So Deb, you know, if she wins and she goes to Congress, which it looks very likely, she's running in a district that leans pretty Democratic. You know, her chances right now in most polling show that she likely will win against her candidate. She'll be the first Native American woman to serve in Congress.
Which is remarkable, isn't it?
It is remarkable, and right now we only have 2 Native Americans, both men, both from Oklahoma. But yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of historical firsts that we're also seeing in this election cycle where, you know, another woman that we also interviewed that I think we might get to later, she would be the first Korean American woman to serve in Congress if she won.
Pearl Kim.
Pearl Kim, precisely. So, you know, Deb is running, like I said, she's running in New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. It does lean Democratic. They did vote for Hillary Clinton in the general election, so her chances of winning and going into Congress look quite good. And she also is part of the, she's part of the Pueblo Laguna tribe. So, you know, to her, and she talks about this, it's really important for her to be able to bring that perspective to Congress. And she talks a lot about the U.S. government having, you know, sort of owing this to tribes and making sure that they are seated at the table when there are issues that matter to them, such as, you know, the Dakota Access Pipeline.
and at a time when so many Native Americans in North Dakota are finding it harder to vote due to new requirements about having a physical address and ID. So did you get the sense that this sort of, was it pressure or was it inspiration, was it both, to cross this threshold, this landmark, which is kind of unbelievable that there hasn't been a Native American woman until now?
I think it was a little bit of both. You know, she talked about the fact that it's not an easy decision to run for office. You know, many of the women who we spoke to talked about having to really give a lot of thought before deciding to, you know, throw their hat in the ring, so to speak. And so she talked about the fact that, you know, she threw a dinner party with her friends and her family members and said, look, I'm thinking about running for Congress. Let's hash out the pros and cons. And they did. They had dinner. They talked about it. And she finally decided that it was important to her that she run for Congress because it felt like they needed to have a certain perspective that was missing, and she felt that she could fill that role for her community.
A missing perspective that felt all the more missing in the recent debate about Elizabeth Warren's DNA was such a remarkably white people conversation from my point of view, making her, that lack of representation feel all the more acute. But let's also talk about Pearl Kim. Let's take a look at some of your interviews with Pearl Kim.
Certainly been frustrated with some of the rhetoric towards immigrants because being the daughter of immigrants, my parents and myself have obviously contributed greatly, and I've been able to serve publicly. And so for me, it's very important that we welcome immigrants to our country and that we find means and ways to do that. And I think that's also why people are so excited to see me running with my story and my background, being the daughter of immigrants and wanting to serve in this type of office.
It's so interesting to hear a candidate who's Republican who is talking about immigration in such a different way than everyone else. And I find often that those Republicans who might disagree with Trump's immigration policies opt to say nothing as opposed to voicing disagreement. Tell us about Pearl Kim's race.
Yeah, so Pearl Kim, she's running in Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District. She's running against another woman, Mayor Scanlon, who is currently heavily favored to win. So, you know, I think 538 gave Pearl a less than 1 in a 100 chance of winning her district. It leans heavily Democratic. It actually was redrawn in February after the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania ruled that the previous map was unconstitutional. You know, and she's also a first-time candidate. She has a long and distinguished career as a special victims prosecutor prior to running. So she represented people who were victims of child and physical and sexual abuse. So she comes from a very different background, and those were two of the things that she talked about with us, was the fact that she felt very strongly about the Me Too movement. She did cite it as a reason, part of the reason why she wanted to run for office. And she does have a very different stance on immigration than a lot of the other people in her party. Her parents immigrated over from South Korea. The district that she is running in also has a relatively large immigrant community as well. And so I think that that is something that we've seen as well, is you do have candidates who are willing to maybe break from the party line depending on the community that they're trying to serve and the community that they're running in. And I do think that is something that is near and dear to Pearl.
And perhaps there's more scope to do that when you have less of a chance of winning.
Right.
I'm curious with all of these candidates that we've talked about, whether or not they win or lose, so many are first-time candidates. Is this creating a pipeline for future races, for future political prospects that might be developed by their parties?
You'll certainly hear a lot of the women who are involved in getting candidates into pipelines like that saying that this year has been a change. Because one of the biggest challenges that researchers have identified is that typically women don't self-identify as candidates. They're less likely than men are to say, I could run for office.
Or I'm qualified.
Or I'm qualified.
As in similar studies showing a similar phenomenon in job applications, that women might feel that they have to be 100% the right candidate to apply for a job versus, you know, my brother would be like, I'm like 5%. I'm ready for this job.
Right, and what you've seen this cycle is so many women who have qualifying experience but might not have thought of themselves as a politician in a different cycle saying, you know what, I'm going to run. And this is happening with Republicans as well as Democrats, but obviously there are far more Democratic women running in this cycle. And the hope for people who try and get women to run for office is that women will try and run again if they lose, or there will be role models for other women to look to. There will be playbooks for other women to look to say, there is a chance for victory. Someone like me ran for Congress, maybe I can, or maybe I'll run for school board, or maybe I'll run for state legislator.
The U.S. ranks really poorly in the world for the number of women that it has in government. One UN body ranks us 104th in terms of women in the legislative body. So I'm wondering what stops women from running, because it's not a biological fact. Right. I just have to put that out there because there are countries with a parity with more women than men. There's a lot of countries from 103rd up in the world who are doing better than we are. What is the thing that you think stops women running? Alice?
I mean, I think, Kayla put it in her last answer. We spoke to Jennifer Lawless, who formerly was director of the Women Institute in Politics, is that right? Or Women in Politics Institute.
She just changed her job. I
She
think
just changed her job,
she's
yeah.
at UVA now.
Okay. Yeah, but she formerly
demand.
was the director, yeah. But she wrote a book actually saying that part of the reason why we don't see so many women in politics is because they just don't think of themselves as being able to compete in that realm or be able, they don't think of themselves as viable candidates. So I think sort of maybe the first barrier is that women don't necessarily see themselves as viable candidates, and so they just decide not to run, or
which is a cultural problem.
It is a cultural problem, absolutely. And I think another thing is money. It's just it's really difficult to raise money. It's difficult to raise money if you don't have a system sort of set in place to help you with that. It takes a lot of money to raise to run a campaign, and that's something that we heard frequently from a lot of candidates.
Kayla, have you seen Democratic and Republican women address Me Too differently, or sort of in the same way?
Yeah, it's easier to talk about Democratic women, I think, because their base wants to hear about it. Democratic voters, polling shows, are more likely to believe that sexual harassment and women not being believed about sexual harassment are a really crucial issue. And so I think it's just a natural issue that their voters care about. We've seen Democratic women talking very overtly about it. In fact, a lot of them have shared their stories of being sexually assaulted, experiences with sexual harassment, and saying, this has happened to me. This is what happens when women don't have power. You should elect me. And so they're actually taking these experiences and they're using them to make the case that maybe representation in this country should look a little different. Republicans, on the other hand, they face a bit of a tricky path to talking about it because the president has been accused by numerous women of sexual harassment. However, you will see Republican women talking about issues like sex trafficking. You'll see Republican women talking about, the ones who are in Congress, talking about their work trying to clean up Congress's act when it comes to this problem. And so they're not talking about it, but I think that they are talking about it more carefully or more strategically, or when it is advantageous to them. For instance, Kristi Noem, who's also in our video series, she's a Republican woman running for governor in South Dakota, and she released an ad against her primary opponent that attacked him for his handling of a sexual harassment case. And so she used that as sort of a way to say he couldn't handle this issue. But in terms of Me Too and in terms of jumping out like that, it's definitely something Democrats are talking about more overtly.
Well, I thank you both for coming and talking to us all. Before we head back to Libby and Eugene, I want to show a little bit more, a clip from your series, and then take it back to you guys.
Congress is an elite institution. In the early days of our country, our congressmen were wealthy white landowners, and that's the only people who had access to run. And so I do think that while the gates have opened and now everyone has the legal opportunity to run for Congress, there are certainly barriers in place.
Throughout American history, women have been underrepresented in Congress. Women of color, even more so. Right now, they make up only 7% of Congress.
We can't shy away from the fact that we continue to have racism and discrimination in this country that definitely bleeds over to the political realm.
So women of color face specific and different challenges than other groups that are distinct from white women and black men. In particular, women of color usually face challenges raising money. Their networks are typically other women of color who don't earn as much money.
Despite these hurdles, women of color running this year see 2018 as an opportunity to challenge the status quo.
If you want to watch more of that video series, Jean's popping it into chat. I think it's already there because you are on the ball. And apparently a friend of women, as Hannah said. A friend to all. Jean Park, friend to all. Thanks so much, Hannah Jewel. So fascinating to see how this election is going to play out. Before we leave you guys, I want to just hear from you, Eugene, a race that you are watching, either because it's changing and shaking things up, or because it's just one that we haven't talked about as much.
Well,
what is on your mind?
This is a race we've talked about a lot,
Okay.
and you may be surprised that I'm still focused on it. But one of the main reasons I'm still interested in the Cruz-O'Rourke race, Ted Cruz, Beto O'Rourke, is there hasn't been a poll in 10 days. And I got that from 538, and they would know. And within that 10 days, they've had the CNN town hall. They've had the Cruz-Trump rally, where Cruz, in part, depending on which side you look at, maybe came off poorly for like having a full pivot on Trump. And there's been some aggressive campaigning on both sides of that race. And so I think the last time we were here, last week, Cruz was beating by like 9 points. I'm not saying he's not beating. I just want to know what it is, but we don't know right now.
And as we mentioned, we're already seeing voters in Texas go to the polls with big turnout all over the state.
So yeah, we're like voting. 10 days. That's an old poll.
Yeah, it's ancient history. It's so outdated.
Yeah.
I'm going to mention a House race that's kind of close to here. This is the race where Dave Bratt, Congressman, is defending his turf. I just find this so fascinating because you guys might remember that Dave Bratt primaried Eric Cantor, who was the second most powerful Republican in the House. It was a shocker.
Oh yeah.
And Dave Bratt like Tea Partied him. He was like from the conservative flank. This is a former college professor in Virginia, about an hour or so outside of DC. And now he's getting a pretty tough challenge from a Democrat named Abigail Spanberger, who is a former CIA officer. She's new to politics. There's been a lot of mudslinging in this. They had a recent debate that the Post covered. It was so fascinating. Dave Bratt dissed Nancy Pelosi so many times that it started to get laughs by the end of it because he kept bringing up her name. He kept talking about the liberal agenda of Nancy Pelosi. And then Abigail Spanberger has really had to defend herself because there have been some attack ads against her that she says are just not true. She said that she's not necessarily going to support Pelosi for House Speaker if she's in Congress and they win control of the chamber. She does not support Medicare for All, something that he has claimed. And so she's had to really push back against some of the misleading claims, but this is going to be so interesting just because Bratt was a big part of this Tea Party movement in America.
Yeah.
So I'm so curious to see how this turns out. It also just shows the changing demographic of some of these suburban and exurban areas, you know, as they shift from red to potentially purple to potentially blue.
Yeah, no, I was
watching that.
Having a conversation about that, especially in Virginia very recently, as you know, a community, a state that 15 years ago definitely would have been in some red conversations, especially some counties, and now not as much.
All right, so we'll stay tuned to that. I noticed on chat people were asking about our election night coverage.
Yeah.
Gene?
Yeah, what can we expect?
We will be here starting at 7 o'clock on election night. Eugene and I will be here. Gene, you will be here in spirit, as well as online. I'm sure you'll be on chat. Yeah, we'll be broadcasting all that night. All our producers, the magical elves who are in our ear, they will all be here. I just heard one of them. Hannah will also be on set on election night. Hannah Jewel will be here bringing you the latest on what's going on in terms of social media. We really have like a big team effort who's going to be out here. We'll be on Twitch, we'll be on WashingtonPost.com, we'll be on YouTube, we'll be everywhere. So we'll be watching to see how it all unfolds. I think somebody was asking how long we're going to go.
No.
TBD.
Forever. It could be, yeah, no idea, right?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know when all the results will be in, and it's fair. I mean, we know that all of the results won't be in by whatever time we leave, even if we left at sunrise, which we won't. But yeah, we'll still be waiting, and we'll still be talking, but we'll have that information to people as soon as possible.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys. Look forward to seeing you between now and election night, but we'll also see you on election night, and we hope to see all of you on election night as well. So thanks for watching. I'm Libby Casey, Eugene Scott, Jean Park. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.